Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's me. I'm back, Robert Phoenix. And sorry for the delay. We are dealing with some technical difficulties at the moment. As some of you may be aware, I have been cut off from my normal Sunday night channel, also known as the 11th House, because apparently I spread some election misinformation back in 2021. And I know the offending stream, and it had to do with my thing with Prince, his death on the Queen's birthday, the 202 days from his death to the inauguration of Donald Trump, hence the number, not the inauguration, the election of Donald Trump, hence the number 22, relating it to the Purple Revolution, Prince being a Gemini, Trump being a Gemini, the Twin Cities, and of course, all the boomeranging back to George Floyd. So I know that that's what that show was about. What I might have specifically said about the so-called election, yeah, I mean, I have no idea. I mean, that was over a year ago, right? And so what happened, I found this out on Friday, and I kind of scrambled, and I did a great show with Danny Katz on this channel on Friday. And a lot of you probably got the email that was sent out by Mishi. The email got us, and hopefully you got that and you hear it. Now, I apologize for not starting as on time as I could, but I've been trying to work with. So right now, over on Boxcast, it's on Boxcast. It's not on my website, but this is actually streaming live on Boxcast. It's also streaming live on Rumble. So we've got 3 channels here, and for whatever reason, if this show gets dinged or whatever, there's a couple copies of it. Who knows? Maybe somebody on Rumble is actually watching. So I was trying to get all those things lined up so we could have a kind of a multi-destination transmission tonight and get into some astrology. I hope everybody's doing well and are navigating through the changes of a very interesting world. You notice how the Paul Pelosi thing has gone away? Have you noticed that? Gee, I wonder why. Might have something to do with the video cam footage that they refused to release. Yeah. It went from a 5-alarm, this is a mega red fire, to a 5-alarm, this is a dumpster fire, and we want to get away from it as quickly as we possibly can. So that's fairly interesting, right? I mean, in a world where, and I've talked about this before, we're living in a time where nothing will go according to plan. Trust me on this. It just won't. Nothing will go according to plan. World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, cricket smoothies. I mean, all that shit's on the menu, right? But the way things are going, it's not going to turn out how the architects of doom are really dialing up, nor might it turn out in the way that a lot of hardcore kind of neo-Christian conservatives think it will turn out as well. That's the other side of this, right? Because they're the ones that hold kind of the polar opposition in some ways. And just when you think your model is going to be the model, something will happen, flip it and invert it. And I like it. It's kind of like true chaos. I mean, do you think that they drummed that thing up with Paul Pelosi? Hey, let's bring this like crazy semi-homeless guy into his house. Let's get him in there and let's create a scene. And out of that scene, we'll create such a stirring controversy that we'll be able to bring this right back to January 6th. And boy, will we let them have it. You think they actually did that? Well, if they did, look what happened. It didn't work, right? Or do you think they're saying, we really need the husbands and wives of the highest elected officials in our party to be on their P's and Q's. Right before this election, we got to make everybody has their shit together. And then look what happens. He gets into an Ed Buck situation with David DePape. Very, very strange shit, right? Really strange. So that's going on now. And even Trump has had a little bit of a dose of this. Yesterday or the day before, he called Ron DeSantis Ron DeSanctimonious, the classic Trump line, right? When he wants to go after somebody, he will belittle them. He's almost, when he's your schoolyard bully, you like him, right? Like we had all these schoolyard bullies for a long time. And then Trump comes along in 2016 and does the debate campaign. And he out schoolyard bullies the schoolyard bully. And you're like, that's our fucking guy, right? But there's a downside to that. It's almost like the golem, who's created to take out the enemies of the rabbi. This is exactly what the story is. And once the golem has taken out the enemies, the golem doesn't stop. It keeps going, right? And Trump has a little bit of golem in him. Like he can't hit the off switch sometimes. So I guess a day later, total Mars retrograde, by the way, right on his sun. Oh, look who's here. Oh, no, you're not going to get up here. Come over here. It's the Astro cat. I was wondering if you'd join us tonight. He was in exile in the bedroom. You had that bed all to yourself, didn't you? You were digging that. You just liked stretching out. You liked stretching out in that bed. I know you did. But your fans await you. And there's a certain tone in the voice that you've learned to recognize. And that's my call. And here you are. Thanks for joining us, Jasper, the astrological cat. So Trump had a Mars retrograde moment. Guess what he had to do? He had to say, and in November, Florida, we need you to reelect the great Marco Rubio and the great Ron DeSantis. So within 24 hours, Trump had a little Mars retrograde action. They probably where's Mars? 24? Might have been almost right on his sun. I apologize for the strange green screen. I'm getting a new computer tomorrow. That'll be interesting. Although eventually I'll be going to the new system. Eventually. But tomorrow I get the new computer. It's not a new computer. It's actually a new used computer. So I have gone to the outlier of all outliers on the MacBook Pro, which is the 2015. So I had such a fucking Mars retrograde moment yesterday. Can I share with you my Mars retrograde moment? And then I'm going to get into Chattaria. I'm going to make sure we got people with some wrenches tonight. But so I know you weren't there. You weren't there. You got away from it. Yeah. No, you didn't have to handle it. I handled it. Yes, I know. Anyway, I'm okay. In Chinese astrology, I'm a rat. So I'm always looking for a good deal, right? That's like our motto. I look at the fucking price tag. I'm the guy that goes to the health food store and looks at the closeout vitamins. Oh, I might need that. I mean, how much is it? Oh yeah, I really need this now, right? I'm that guy. So I'm always trying to find the right angle to make a purchase with something. Tires. I have to get some tires. And I'm thinking, if the diesel goes down, it's going to be harder to get. My tires are okay. Let me get some tires. So I have this car that I purchased a few months ago. Again, it's not a used car. It's a new used car. And it's an older Lexus. It's nothing fancy. Although it does have a hybrid engine. And I got the hybrid engine because I wanted to get better gas mileage. Had nothing to do with saving the planet. The planet would be just fine if I was driving a Humvee, trust me. But I just wanted to save some gas mileage, right? So I got this hybrid. And the rims had lug nut locks on them. And of course, I didn't notice that. So I'd actually bought some tires earlier, and I bought them online. I bought them online through Walmart because they have a pretty good selection of tires, and some of them are actually pretty decent. And then you take them to Walmart where they will change your tires. But there's not a lot of options where I live. So I actually ordered the wrong size the first time, guilty as charged. But when I went down there, they actually took one of my tires off. And I had 4 lug nuts, right, that were locks. And what did they do? They broke one off. How do I know? It was rattling around in my little center glove box, right? The thing, little center console thing. And what the fuck is this? Oh, it's a lug nut. Oh shit, they must have broken it off. Okay, so then I order the correct tires. And I go down to Walmart. You have a key for those lug nuts? I'm like, no, you guys broke them off last time. You broke one off. Well, it's against the law. I'm like, what do you mean against the law? You fucking did it last time. Just break the lock and break the law again. I won't tell anybody. Well, by law, we can't do that. Well, by law, I can fucking use this lug nut and get you guys in trouble. Right. I mean, I didn't say that. I probably should. So I said, okay, let me see if I can find a lug nut key. Go online. Where do I find one? A master set. Harbor Supply. I go, I pick them up, drop the car off. Like, in this box, you will find at least one of these things that will unlock one of my lug nuts, because it actually said so when I typed it in. 2 hours later, your car is ready. Well, my car wasn't ready. None of them worked. None worked. You could have fucking called me and told me, and I could have gone there earlier. Anyway, total Mars retrograde moment. Total Mars and Gemini retrograde moment. I'm like, okay, guess what? We're returning those tires. And that's exactly what I did. And on to Discount Tire on Monday, where they will break the lug nuts because they've told me they will. Isn't that right, Jasper? What would you have done? What would you have done? You would have done the same thing. Total Mars retrograde moment, man. It's like Gemini is having to go backwards. It's like, it's just so fucking weird. Like, you broke it before. Why not break it again? Where's the dude that was there before? Is he gone? Is he the only guy that knows how to break a fucking lug nut illegally? And then the return process at Walmart is always a joy. Sitting there forever and ever and ever. And there's this one guy, unfortunately, he's fits the stereotype of a Walmart customer. He's grossly overweight. He's got some kind of skin thing. I don't know what's going on. Maybe he was burned. He's as wide as a country mile, just grossly overweight. It's just one of these things that's like it's like a cliche here in the country, right? And he's taking forever and ever and ever. And at a certain point, I can only stay quiet for so long. And I try to find kind of a funny way to be an asshole. So I said, so what's going on up here? You guys trying to hack the Pentagon? And the woman behind the counter, she kind of laughed. And then he didn't really say anything. But then he came back around when I had to do my transaction, which was taking a long time. He said, what are you trying to do? How's that Pentagon hacking going? And then I said, I'm hacking the Kremlin, buddy. Okay, we're going next level here. And he laughed. was such a Mars retrograde moment. What was your Mars retrograde moment this weekend? Was it throwing up on my bedspread? That might have been it. All right. Let me go into chat. Let me see who all's here. I gotta deputize. I gotta deputize some of y'all's. Let's see who else. Who do we have here? I could also say hello to everybody too. Let's see who needs a wrench. I know who needs a wrench. Right there. You DJ MC have been deputized. You, Mr. Tom Jordan, have been deputized. Is Ryan in here tonight, or is he taking the night off? Let's see if he's in here. Yeah, got to get my man Ryan. You, Ryan, have been deputized. All right. I got some stars. I got some badges. There she is, Jelena. What's going on, my fellow 2-4 projector? There's Ryan. There's the lovely and talented one, Miss Witchy Poo, Joan S. Let's see. Who else? Beth Berry in the house. Let's see, who's this? Arnie Ortwood. Yeah, I've been waiting since Friday. It's now Monday, New Zealand. Well, Amy, my bad, Amy. Amy, I hope I don't disappoint. Rayanne Robinette. Yes, you're here. You made it. Love of Scorpio is your paper dragon. The paper dragon. Misbehaving too. Love of Scorpio. I said that one already. You're here. Hey, Rob, what's going on? Brother Rob Scanlon. Got those waves, man. Getting some tasty waves out there. There's, of course, Ryan Rocky is in the house. Also, user 13. Sounding very mysterious. It's user 13. Let's see. PB. Good evening, everyone. Sucks about the YouTube channel. This time change, eclipse time. So a little bit. More than suspect. I'm usually not the paranoid type, but sometimes I do dip into the waters, and this is one of them. We got plenty of wrenches. Shirley Loshev, what a delightful person. I had an opportunity to meet Shirley Loshiavo. She came to the event. She's a manifester, and not all manifestors are hell on wheels. I'm telling you, Shirley's one of them. It was great to hear. Speaking on wheels, there's Michelle on wheels. That's right, Michelle on wheels, also known as Michi, the email goddess. She's here. We're talking about doing a Discord channel. More on that later. Boxcast is saying the stream hasn't started there. Let me see what I need to do. Well, it's here now. Let me see what I need to do on Boxcast. Do I need to start this stream? Hold on. Let's see. Well, as long as, okay, end broadcast. Says live, says it's happening. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. Please wait, still hasn't started. I don't know. Well, we're here now. And I believe we're live on Rumble. Right? We're live on Rumble. Yeah. Okay, so we're good. I can always upload one of these to Boxcast. Thanks for the heads up, Tom. I don't know why it hasn't happened. It's one of those mysteries. All right, who else do we have? Charles Mazak. What happened to the Bills today? Sky Gypsy 333. What's happening, Sky Gypsy? JMP Love. Fran is here as well. Fantastic. CC Jones. No limits. All right. Yeah, boy, checking in. I love No Limits. What's going on, Johnny? Good to see you. Equicentric Rumble is not streaming. It should be. I was just there. Looks like it's streaming to me. Sometimes Rumble takes a little bit longer. Let me just check. Let me just check here. Hold on. Turn that down. Okay. It should be streaming and Jasper, yeah, okay. The Astro Cat. I'm watching the intro. The intro is happening. And let me just go through here. The intro has happened. And what about live? Okay. All right. So it looks like it's YouTube or bust tonight. I'm just going to have to refine the technique here. That's just the way it is. Thanks for the heads up. We've turned the clocks back to 500 BC. Nice. Yes, indeed. Good to see you, Chris and Steve. Welcome to the show. Sounds now like a 30-minute love connection. Aaron Carter found in a bathtub. Sounds familiar. They think we're stupid. What's going on, Bo? Good to see you. Yeah, I'll have to figure out the Rumble thing. You know, I was looking at Aaron Carter, and God, he looked horrible. You know, he looked horrible, and he had look. If you want to tattoo your face, and you think it's beautiful, please. It's your body. You can do whatever you want. Okay. Sometimes people do tattoos to theoretically adorn their beauty, right? I think Aaron Carter was doing tattoos to cover his face. You could tell that he had contempt. He had self-contempt. Aaron Carter hated himself, and he was using these tattoos so he could literally disfigure who he was. And if you don't know who he is, he was part of the whole kind of boy band scene back in the day. And that whole world is just like really specious. That guy, Lou Pearlman, started a lot of those boy bands and wound up going to prison. And theoretically, he died in prison, although you never know with some of these characters. But, you know, he was around the whole Disney world, right? That whole dark evolutionary arc. And you could just tell, you know, that this was a guy who was really fucked up, you know, really, really fucked up, had probably done things that were just in his body, mind, and spirit were deplorable. Maybe they were done to him, maybe he participated, maybe he consented, who knows? You know, did he die in his bathtub because he had introduced some kind of technological insert into his body? Was that part of it? Well, there was a runner who was at mile 21. He was ahead in his race. This is just what, today or yesterday? Just dropped. Just like that. He was in the lead. He had 3 miles to go in a marathon. It's 24 miles. At mile 21, he just dropped. So I don't know if that's what happened with Aaron Carter, but Aaron Carter's background just has a very dark evolutionary arc. And you could just see that all he wanted to do was just disfigure his appearance. It was quite tragic when you look at him, actually. All right, where are we here? I'm over here. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see. MLMCI. Is it normal for Mars RX? Yes, that's a really good question. And my answer to that would be yes, especially in Gemini, because Mars is movement. You got, you know, the old saying in astrology, you either use Mars or get abused by Mars. I mean, that's how Mars works. So you have to actively use Mars. And it does have this, marching forward, right? We get the word March and Mars, and they're all etymologically connected. So Mars retrograde, particularly in Gemini, does act a lot like a Mercury retro. I'll tell you what's also another little astrological thing. There's this guy from the hip hop group Migos. I think we're based out of Atlanta. He was in Houston, and he was at a a dice game. Dice, by the way, I believe is a Gemini sport because, of course, you use two of them, right? Two dice, and which is again falling in that double world. And of course, coming up, Snake Eyes is a total Gemini thing. And his son is at 25 Gemini. So Mars was going retrograde right off of his sun. And dude was in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, he got into some kind of an altercation. I honestly, I think they were at a bowling alley in Houston playing dice outside, and money was involved, and somebody either lost and didn't pay or whatever it was. The other person didn't like the fact that Takeoff was doing whatever he was doing. I don't have any details. All I know is he had Mars pretty much camped out on his sun, going retrograde, going backwards. And of course, Mars is connected to things like violence. Now, his Venus is at the same, pretty much at the same degree, Venus and Taurus, at the same degree as this upcoming eclipse. So so if we're looking at like the eclipse being a week and a half before and a week and a half out, and really having about a 3-week eclipse window, like his Venus is already in that eclipse window in Taurus. So very interesting kind of study in astrology over somebody's chart. Now, if you had an astrologer and the astrologer said, yo, Takeoff, you better be cool. Don't get into any arguments or disagreements around dice games. It could be fatal. Would that have stopped? Would that have kept him from experiencing his own demise? I don't know. He might have gotten into a car wreck on the way home. Who knows? I don't know. But it's one of those things. Like as soon as it happened, I'm like, my spidey instincts. What sign is this guy? Oh, he's a Gemini. What degree? Oh, 25 degrees. Where's Mars? Oh, 24. It's just coming off. This is coming right off his sun. Like, oh. So there you go. There's, literally what a name. Takeoff. See ya. Took off. I guess now there's only 2 Migos. There were 3 Migos. There was Takeoff, Offset, and some other off. I don't know. I'm not all that intimate with the Migos, to be honest with you. Anyway, the answer to your question is yes. If you don't use Mars, Mars will abuse you, which is very, very important. It's a very, very important piece of astrology to understand. So my own personal experience with Mars, because as astrologers, I think it's important to speak from our experience, was I have Mars in Cancer at 0 degrees and natally it's in my 8th house, right? But I was born in Europe. So ultimately, I wound up living in Northern California for the majority of my life. And when that happened, Mars got relocated to my 11th house. And I've told this story before. I used to get into fight with friends. Like I would fight my friends. Not people that I necessarily hated, but people that I knew, and I get into beefs with them, right? That's a total Mars 11th house thing. It's getting into beefs with your friends. And that happened for a while until I stopped getting into beefs with my friends. And then there's a whole other application with Mars in the 11th house. And then when I moved to Texas, my Mars got relocated to my 10th house, and all I do is work. That's pretty much all I do and that's more, and if you don't use it, it will, it'll, and in certain houses, those cardinal houses, it's really important. In fact, the 2 areas where Mars doesn't always play nice are the 4th house and the 7th house. Mars in the 4th house natally, in most cases, I've seen people who've grown up around military fathers or their house is run like the military. Like you get up at a certain time and you do everything at a certain, like it's all a military time with Mars in the fourth house. I've also seen a lot of anger and violence with Mars in the fourth house. This is just natally, right? So at some point as an adult, you have to do something with that so you don't recreate that. And usually that Mars is good for things like remodeling and renovating homes. You know, that would be a good example of taking a negative with Mars in which is exalted in Capricorn and in the 10th house, right? And putting it in the fourth house where it's not that happy. But if you could, you know, rehab homes and you know, get some stuff done with that, flip them, whatever. It's also pretty good for antiquing. You know, it's Mars in the fourth house, taking, you know, things that other people place some degree of value on and being able to kind of, you know, reinvest some energy into them. So that would be a good Mars in fourth house. Or you live in a home where you have to get a lot of work done. You know, like you live in a home that might be farm-like, or you're homesteading. You know, if you have Mars in the fourth house and you're a homesteader, my God, you couldn't ask for anything better, right? You know, getting up at, you know, 3 a.m. and, you know, fixing a fence after a storm or whatever, that's perfect for your Mars, right? The other house where Mars is difficult is the 7th house, because that's the house of Venus. And if you have Mars in the 7th house, you really need to be active with your partner. If you have a bad sex life and you have Mars natally in the 7th house, that's not going to go well, right? A lot of sexual frustration. So that's basic, that's primary. But you can do other things. You can start businesses and work with your partner. And sometimes there could be healthy competition between two people with Mars in the 7th house. You work out together. Like, you got to use that Mars, because if you don't use that Mars with your partner in a way that is proactive, you'll fight. You'll have power struggles. Like, it's not a great place. You could use it also in terms of, let's say you're a consultant, right? And you're doing something through contract work with Mars. Mars can be very good there. You can help people get proactive. Like if you want to be like a life coach or a trainer, you know, Mars, if you have Mars natally in the 7th house, that could be a good position for Mars. Anyway, that's really the key to Mars. You either use it or you get abused by it, right? So you may as well use it. Now the retrograde, which we've been talking about, it's a little trickier. It's not as cut and dry, right? So these are things where, especially in Gemini, you know, like well, we have Steve Crimmy in the house, who's a Gemini and a writer. Boy, Mars retrograde, that would be great for editing. Going back and looking at your work, going back and looking at other people's work, you know, with a Mars retrograde in Gemini, that would be a good thing, right? So you could go back and see what's going on. Oh, well, this sentence needs to be fleshed out here. Oh, this paragraph needs to be trimmed, right? That's a good Mars retrograde kind of piece. So there's applications with Mars retrograde. If you have been in a conflict with your siblings, this gets into like the vaccine amnesty program. If you have gotten into a conflict with your siblings, Mars retrograde can be interesting, because that might be one of those. Well, we're going to get into this too tonight with the big topic, like the timeline thing, which we're going to talk about. What happened to my ears? Don't have any ears. Look like Mitt Romney. Guy's got no fucking ears. Anyway, that could be a really interesting thing to tackle, because God knows, you know, there have been family members, brothers, sisters, extended family, really duking it out around the old carjack. You got to watch what you say now, right? Now it's all codified, and a lot of you people have been around here long enough to know what I mean about the carjack, but if you have had a real row, there's a word people don't usually use anymore. Is it row? If you had a row, I say, if you've had a row with a family member, it might be a good time to redress that. This could be one of those moments where when Mars looks like it's going backwards in the sky, could actually help you clear the air a bit, air the old bag out, as they say. I mean, you could do that. You might have to open some wounds, but Christ, there's so many wounds that are being opened now anyway. It's not like there's any shortage of open wounds on the planet at this point. What you do with it, that's a whole other thing, right? Timing, I think, would be critical. But this whole amnesty program, you guys read that thing in the Atlantic about, well, maybe it's just time to forgive everyone and let's move on. No, you don't do that with a Mars retrograde. Sorry, that does not happen. You publish that way too soon. You publish that months too soon. You should be publishing that in maybe February, but not now. It's yes, I know there were people, they don't know how they came to these conclusions. They somehow became possessed and obsessed by them. And please forgive them. They came up with these things that they thought were right. They thought it was in your best interest. And if we're going to get along, please forgive them. Yes, they may have killed your grandmother, but don't worry. Just please forgive them. Yes, you may have lost your job because of this. It's okay. You probably have 2 jobs now to make up for the one you lost. See how that works? Some people only have 1 job. Now you have 2. It's a little early for that. And Mars retrograde won't allow it. Pushback. So the other thing with Mars was this, and this really gets into the topic at hand tonight, retrograde. This is really interesting. When we think of Mars, what do we think about? Well, we think of Aries, don't we? And what is Aries? Aries is the god of war. And if we think of the greatest god of war in the 20th century, who do we think of? Oh, Adolf Hitler, right? Yeah. And of course, what is the Third Reich's ideology based on? The Aryan race. So now what are we doing? We're having a lot of discussion about Jews in Germany and Adolf Hitler in World War II and concentration. Do you think this is all just by happenstance, or maybe, just maybe, astrology could be playing a role in this? I think it is. So we're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about these timelines because, I mean, let's face it, we're not ever going to able to fully move forward, if indeed that's in our own best interest at this point in time, as a people, a planet. There was at one point in time, there was this idea that we were all in it together, right? That's kind of, and this is like way pre-COVID. This goes back to, I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony, the Woodstock generation, even though there were a lot of people with short hair who couldn't stand anybody with fucking long hair, but that's besides the point. But there was more of a sense that we were kind of one family, and that's where, we would evolve through that idea of being one family, right? And that just went, way off the road. That's like taking the exit off the freeway and getting lost on some fucking county road somewhere. And then you're in this town like Sean Penn shows up in that movie U-Turn. Like that's where reality is gone. And but we were there at one point in time. And people of my generation who were, born in the late 50s and 60s, we were raised on that idea, that we could get along, that we could find, commonality through really, I know it sounds corny, but commonality through some degree of like diverse origin or diverse background. And I have my own stories around it. And it wasn't a fucking pipe dream. It wasn't a pipe dream. It was like, it's when we tap in to the most transcendent part of who we are, which I do believe is God, when we tap into that most transcendent part of who we are, we're connected. We're connected through this story of life, right? And I told this story before. I'll tell it again. It's just one of those moments where when I ran out of gas on a freeway in Oakland, it was busy. It was in like around 4:00. Traffic's really starting to pick up. Highway 24, if you guys know where that is. And this raggedy old car pulls over and picks me up. And it's this older black couple. I would say, who knows, maybe 60s. I don't know, but they were older and they're driving this, big old Plymouth kind of hoopty thing. And they took me to the gas station. I got a can and I came back and I put the gas, and it was just like, to me, that moment it'll always stick with me. Like those people didn't have to do that. Like they could have said, oh, look at Whitey, keep walking, Whitey, right? They didn't have to they just saw me as a human in that moment. They just pulled over, and it was like, they were people of like humble means, right? So I do believe that we can, because we've been set at each other's throats. And this Mars retrograde in Gemini, since we're on the topic, really gets into this whole idea of polarity, right? Gemini is polaric. I do a lot of my astrological study, research, fascination has to do with Gemini and this whole idea of duality. Everything from the sign and the people that occupy the sign to the twin towers. I think it plays a huge role, and it's a very pivotal part of this realm that we're living in. So we have been so polarized. Really, I mean, the polarization, as far as I could see it, in the 20th century, it starts with Clinton. Because when you get into Clinton, there's this interesting thing that starts to happen with the so-called truth or patriotic community. You have Ruby Ridge, which takes place. You have the Branch Davidians. You have the Freemen in Montana. You have this thing that goes down in Atlanta and Richard Jewell. Like the fracturing is beginning. They're starting to look at the everyday American as a target. Like we need to build a case that these people are going to be dangerous people. Timothy McVeigh, add him to the list, right? So it all starts there around Clinton. That's when the whole duality game really gets cranked up in our recent memory. And then you get into Bush, and of course we have 9/11, which is this dark magical occult ritual that has to do with duality and the elimination of duality for one tower to rule them all, right? And we've gone through all the players with that, but there's also this much deeper polaric egregore that's set loose into the culture, and it's Christianity versus Islam, and that's towards the middle to the tail end of Pluto's journey, through Sagittarius during that time. So we have these holy wars, again, very polaric. You're either with us or against us. I mean, that's what Bush said. How much more polaric do you get than that, right? So that comes into play. And then after that, then we get, that shit just keeps going, right? It's like, oh. And then we get into Obama, and we get 8 years of Obama and talk about more deeply divisive polarity. And then the whole black-white issue gets really stirred up, starting with Trayvon Martin, which I've covered a lot, right? Trayvon Martin, the whole Trayvon Martin thing. And even the whole, and this is just a little weird astrological side note, Trayvon Martin and Jonathan Martin, both Martins, what are we dealing with? They're both dealing with this idea of Martin and Martian and war. They're both from Florida. And Jonathan Martin played for the Miami Dolphins. He played, I believe, guard for the Miami Dolphins or tackle. And he was supposedly bullied, by players on his own team, guy by the name of Richie Incognito. Basically the coaching staff said, toughen this guy up. He's a wuss, right? And then it became a race issue. They turned it into a race issue. And Richie Incognito was a racist. He wasn't a racist. They liked each other. They hung out. They were just trying to get him to be a little more, I don't know, alpha-esque, right? But you have both Martins, both in Florida. Anyway, so the deep divisive polaric energy was really activated with Obama, right? And it went black, white, and even when Trump finally shows up in 2016, it's now right, left, black, right. So we've been dealing with this thing, this really deep dualistic programming, divide and conquer, divide and conquer, divide and conquer, divide and conquer. Well, now Mars is retrograde, and we're starting to see into that process. That's going to bring us into Kanye West and Kyrie Irving territory. And it may make some people uncomfortable when we kind of go down that path, right? But this is where we are now with Mars. We're looking at Mars and its functionality through Gemini and how we've been divided, right? And if we can figure out that there are architects of division, then we have a much better chance at understanding that we all probably have more in common than we think we do. And I did a show on Friday with Danny Katz, and we got into the JQ, and Danny was great, and she brought up some really great points. Some things we agreed upon, other things we didn't fully agree upon, but we had this great conversation, and I really appreciate and respect her for having that conversation with me. But Mars retrograde also gets into this whole idea of what? Germany, the Third Reich, Hitler. I mean, what have they been calling Kanye? Well, they said Kanye had this weird fascination with Hitler. I don't know if he did or he didn't. Who the fuck knows? But this is what happens with Mars retrograde. This is what happens. And I'm telling you, these wars have been a lie. They've been a lie. They have absolutely, utterly. And how can we, as a civilization, actually build and grow a civilization built on the millions and millions of bones of bodies who died in lies? We can't. Just look at what happened in the Mayan culture. I mean, literally, they built their fucking their temples on bones. There, you can just see it, right? That's like a literal representation. And what happened to them? They either checked out of time, or they had some kind of spiritual catastrophe that evaporated them. Who knows, right? But that's what we did. And then when Kyrie Irving posts something called Hebrews to Negroes on his Twitter page, and doesn't really say anything. Well, it's created a firestorm now. And I don't think it's going to be that easy to put out. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at this timeline thing, which does take us back to World War II, and everything that is kind of associated with World War II is something that's floating around our communication sphere right now. And even terms like fascism and fascists, and we'll get into some of that tonight as well. We'll take another stab at Kyrie Irving's chart. We'll look at the eclipse. We'll also look at the chart of the moment. And I'll tell you who else I wanted to look at. This is interesting. We were watching a documentary today on Nostradamus. And I used to have this fantasy. Wasn't even really a fantasy. I used to actually think that I was Nostradamus in a past life. Well, I mean, how many fucking people have thought that? I was Nostradamus in a past life. Yes. But the weird thing is, okay, this is just a notice. We're going to look at his chart. His south node is at 29 degrees. And that's the degree of my sun. I'm like, kind of interesting. So if we have time, and I'm not saying I was, but it's just interesting, right? But if we have time, I want to revisit Nostradamus because he's an interesting character, and he may be tied to more things about history than we know. And I'll try to unearth some of that when we get into his chart, if we have time. In the meantime, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. And we have been talking astrology. I haven't been jerking off with obscure stories and references. So why don't we look at the chart of the moment, and let's take a whack at that. All right, let's see. Oh, do I have this already set up? Hold on. Yes. So some of the things we're gonna talk about tonight are, I wouldn't say they're crazy, but they're new ways of looking at astrology and time through one person. I'll leave it at that. Okay, so let's get into the chart of the moment. Let's see what we got on our plate. Oh, that's the wrong place. Although a place I wouldn't mind being. Who wouldn't mind being in Florence, Italy right now? Just raise your hand. Wouldn't that be cool? You go to bed, you wake up, you're the same person. It's the same timeline and everything, right? But you wake up and you're in a hotel room in Florence, Italy. That would be cool. It's like, what? How did I get here? I mean, I'm not complaining, but all right. All right, let's look at the chart of the. So we're going to try to get some traction on the week ahead here. Let's see what we're dealing with. Of course, we got the eclipse, which we'll talk about. That is coming. She's a coming. I just realized, I need with this shirt? I think I need one of those little like leather things that tie down like that. I think that would really set this shirt off. Just notice that. Okay. Here we go. There's our friend Mars retrograde, 25 degrees. And this is Austin time. And look at that. We're talking Gemini, and Gemini is on the ascendant. Mm-hmm. And we got Mars front and center. What can you believe? For me, this weekend, it's like I was drained. We're just getting into this period where we're all feeling drained. Well, I think a lot of us are feeling drained, not all of us. But I felt drained all weekend, and that's that Mars Neptune square. Jupiter right there as it retrogrades can actually amplify that. So you have to watch out a little, when you get into maybe a little bit of conflict here. Mr. What was his name? Liftoff, takeoff. Yeah, he really should have thought 2 or 3 times about his verbal altercations with that dice game, because things can, blow up and get out of hand really quickly with the Jupiter Neptune conjunction. And there's a lot I'd say there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear in the air. And there's a lot of weird things that are getting exposed too, especially around work. Mars is a planet that's associated with work. And you're seeing these people that are telling their sob stories about being let go by Twitter and Elon Musk. And it's like, really? We're supposed to have sympathy for you? There's one guy said, he posted a tweet. It's like gone viral now on Twitter. He's like, well, Elon, he's worked for 7 years for the inclusion, equity, and fairness in speech team at Twitter. And Elon Musk fired him. This is my friend, and he's living in his car now. That's a true tweet, by the way. So first of all, if he's your friend, why the fuck are you letting him live in his car? That's the first thing that comes to my mind. The second thing that comes to my mind is that you've been working for Twitter for 7 years. I bet you've been making a pretty decent salary. And now you have to live in your car. And now we have to feel sorry for you. This is a total Mars retrograde, Neptune, Jupiter square. It's like, you got to be kidding me. You have to be kidding me. So there's a lot of victimization in the air. There's a lot of victimization, and there's people who want to stand up for being victimized. And Jamel Hill from ESPN is now crowing over the fact that Tiffany Cross lost her job at MSNBC because racist white women didn't like her. I mean, this stuff now is getting to this point where it's becoming purgative. You know what I mean? It's becoming purgative. It's almost like we need to just vomit this shit up, right? Because it's become so prevalent in our society, and people are getting sick. They're getting sick of it. And how this actually manifests, we'll see. Remember, I said pitchforks and torches 2 weeks ago, and then we saw the pitchfork brigade at BlackRock. What did I say last week? It was, watch out, they're going to try to martyr Trump. They're going to try, and then a day later, the MSM was saying Trump's dead, Trump's been killed. Like, that was really fucking weird. Like, that's when you look at a show, you do a show, and then the next day something comes up, and it's like, wow, reality is really elastic. It is really elastic. So, here we are. We're all, I don't know how it's, but we're at this point now, right? And Mars is just going to keep retrograding. It's going to keep getting closer into that square with Neptune, and it's going to dish up victims and martyrs on a platter. Total victims and martyrs on a platter. And as long as Jupiter is hanging out there in the retrograde position, it's just going to make everything bigger. And we're dealing with this energy as we're coming into the midterms. Heaven help us. That's aside from the eclipse, which we'll get into. But this is the energy that we're dealing with. Now, the good news, if there's good news, is that as Mars is retrograding slightly closer to Saturn, which means it's doing a dance with some order, right? Mars, Saturn, it's order, returning to some level and semblance of order. But that's a 7-degree orb, right? And be careful what you wish for with order. That's all I say. Be careful what you wish for. Could cooler heads prevail? Yes. Could logic and reason, like real logic and real reason, not the logic and reason they use to define the science, could that be applicable here? Yeah, maybe. Maybe, but what's going to be more overwhelming? Is it going to be the need and the call for order? Or is it going to be this overwhelming sense of the victimization and fictionality and the preponderance for an addiction to being a victim, right? The addiction to victimization. This is all headed into the eclipse. This is not great energy. Maybe Mars trining Saturn might have to do with some kind of theoretical election integrity. Again, I say theoretical. And now we have Mars in an inconjunct with Pluto. And God, I mean, doesn't that just feel, it's going to be an inconjunct with Pluto until it gets even like 2313, right? Pluto's not really going anywhere. 2319. So we've got basically 2 more retrograde degrees, which means it's going to be an inconjunct on election night. And Mars-Pluto inconjuncts are very intense. Very, very intense. How do I read this energy? I read this energy, it's like compulsion. It's compulsive, and there are either people or groups that are scared or antsy. And I can tell you right now that there is something going on here with this Mars-Pluto inconjunct, where it's almost as if things get too squirrely between now and Wednesday, that is the proverbial bomb to drop. Mars-Pluto inconjunct. It's also like what's going on behind the scenes, in Capricorn, the hierarchy, right? These are the administrators, the architects of this so-called reality are very Capricornian. And there's something going on here with this Pluto-Mars inconjunct. And man, you throw that in there with the Mars-Jupiter square, Mars-Neptune square, that's a pretty intense cocktail, right? I mean, everything is getting so wide. I mean, I know I talk about this every week, but it's true because there's really no relief. We haven't really gotten any relief. Well, I mean, what would it look like to have some relief? Well, it would look like somebody who'd been a complete shithead actually have to do a perp walk. I know on the left, they say, oh, we're just waiting for Trump to do his perp walk and arrest him and arrest his kids. And then that's their relief right then. It's like, oh, God. Well, then let's get Alex Jones next. Or, I mean, they won't be done until everybody is just completely wiped out. Right. So even if they got their Moby Dick, which would be Trump, they'd only be happy for so long. But there does seem to be something here where in the midst of all of this Sturm und Drang, that there can be a reasonable voice in the noise and something very clear where there has been a grievous injustice, not just to the American people, but people in general, right? That could somehow be addressed, right? I mean, I know I'm off in fairyland a little bit here, but the reason why we're at this point is because none of that has happened. None of that has happened. Period. End of story. They just keep these programs up and running. Doesn't matter what side, left, right. Doesn't matter what side. They're not going to jail. They're not going to jail. Ghislaine Maxwell, who's that? Where'd she go? What happened to all those people associated? Oh, don't worry about that. Talk about Kyrie Irving and all the bad things he said, right? So this is one of the big problems, is that we haven't had any relief. I mean, you would think that if you were on the so-called left, let's just play this game. You would think that by having Joe Biden as your president and having all these cool things that Biden has done and promoting, Rachel Cohen or whoever, Richard Cohen, right? You would think, oh man, look, our dude is in. We got our people in. Man, we're doing great. We don't have to worry about any of these other things. We're good. We're good. Yeah, we didn't like you, Trump. You sucked. Your family sucked. All you MAGA hat people, you all sucked. But guess what? Our guys in the White House, and we're running the show, so we're kicking back and we're just letting it roll. You think that? No, that hasn't happened at all. So even when they get somebody that they think will bring them some kind of psychic relief and closure, it doesn't work. It's not enough, right? So that's where we are now. There's the reason why everything is so taut, high tension wires. The reason why it's so taut is because none of these things have ever been addressed, have ever been closed. Like what happened with the raid? And it went down to Mar-a-Lago. It took all this shit, right? Well, that was in September. Where are we now? Well, we're coming up here on Thanksgiving pretty soon. And it's like, oh yeah, whatever happened to that? I mean, this is a problem with the so-called reality we're living in, because all these things are all happening simultaneously, and none of them are being resolved. None of them are being resolved. So would it take just one bit of resolution in order to redress some of these things? Probably not. We're probably looking at a complete and utter overhaul of whatever this thing is. So headed into the eclipse, we've got that Pluto in conjunct with Mars. Boy, I mean, that just reeks of havoc. Just reeks of havoc. I can see recounts, recalls. I mean, this is not going to, and then the blame game is on. It is on, right? That's where we're headed this week. This is going to be a momentous week. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 days. Sometimes it takes a month to compile all the election results. That's what they're telling you. Really? Never used to be that way. I'm one of those people. By the way, me and voting, we never really got along very well. Not a big voter. And it's for these reasons. I knew this shit was happening all the time anyway. All right, let's talk about some good stuff. Let's talk about all the Scorpio. Mercury, Sun, Venus, they're all hanging out together. The menage a trois of the underworld right there, right? And what's happening there? Well, it's eliciting knowing, right? This is a very significant psychic and intuitive trine right now. Scorpio is really instinctual, really deep and really instinctual. And it rules the higher and the lower nature. It rules both, right? The lower nature down here, the higher nature of Scorpio is like almost like the perfection of wisdom, the perfection of wisdom. It's literally taking the energy from your root, right, and going all the way up to your crown. That is how Scorpio operates. Now we're into like Kundalini territory, where both of these realms are connected. This is the rainbow bridge. So there is a lot of very intense energy this week locked into things intuitively. So it's going to be really interesting to balance out this whole deep, intuitive, kind of psychic command of your world, one's world, versus this like really intense flight of paranoia, fantasy, and imagination. They're like these two different energies going on, and they may not necessarily be mutually exclusive. There may be some validity to what's going on here, right? There may be some validity to feeling as though things are off, or they're not working, or person X was responsible for some form of negligence when it came to this thing, right? And then you have all this Scorpio down here, which knows without a shadow of a doubt that this is exactly what's happening. It's not even it can be an either or, but it's not an either or. I mean, you could have your alarm bells going off and know deep down inside that this thing is not flying. So this is a very powerful time here to, trust at a very deep level, to know what you know. If you know that thing from the core of your being to be true, deeply instinctually true, right? You need to follow that and have conversations with people. Have conversations with people you trust, though. Don't just start having conversations with random strangers. I mean, sometimes it's okay or cool, but this is the circle of trust right here. 13 to 18 degrees, right? Have conversations with people that don't think you're fucking crazy. On the flip side here, we've got Saturn, and Saturn's monitoring those conversations. You think I'm kidding? Am I paranoid to think that a week before the election, my other channel, more popular than this channel having 3,000 subscribers, the other one having 11,000 subscribers, that all of a sudden, for whatever reason, for a show that I did in 2021, now all of a sudden I can't live stream? Am I paranoid to think about that? Am I paranoid to think that the timing seems a little suspicious? Well, there's your Saturn right here. Saturn is cracking down. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens over not just the next 48 hours, but even post-election, in what you're going to be allowed to talk about. You may not be allowed to talk about much, right? You may not be able to be allowed to talk about it. Or there may be an extreme form of censorship with Saturn here, right? But you're dealing with fixed signs, and Scorpio just does not say no. It's like, okay, oh, all right, let me go a little bit deeper. You're telling me not to go there, I'm going there. That's what Scorpio does. You're telling me not to go there, I'm going there. I'm going in, and I'm boring into this thing, right? And when we have all these planets, so tomorrow, let's see, it'll be at 14. Mercury will be at 15 on election night, right? So we have Venus. That's also very political too. From a political standpoint, now Mercury becomes more calculated here in front of the sun. And it's kind of like, okay, we need to make some decisions. We need to make decisions about who we want in power. That's backroom deal stuff. That's very much backroom deal stuff. So this is going to be one hell of a week, I'm telling you. You want to live in a time where, at the very least, shit is interesting, even if it's dark. And this is definitely one of those times. What else do we have? Saturn Uranus square. See, this is all about the status quo. And people are just, you can just tell, man, people are so tired of the status quo. And there's a plus side and then there's a negative side to that. The plus side is that, well, you get a lot of revolutionary fervor. And we know that what happens when revolutions happen, people lose their heads. The highest points of chaos are the greatest points of change. So revolution isn't always what it's cracked up to be. So that's one downside when people are not down with the status quo. So that's one downside. You get the revolutionary spirit. And then you also get people or entities or groups who are there to give people an alternative to the status quo, which may actually be another version of the status quo. I'm just saying, right? But that's where we are right now. And I think there's some health to it, right? There's some healthy components and healthy aspects to it. And then we have Chiron hanging out there at 12 degrees in sextile with Saturn. And this is where people are daring, right? With Chiron, they're daring to talk about something that the status quo or the architects of this realm, right, with Saturn, right, it's in that sextile. It's like it's an opening, and the opening is one person, two, three. Now all of a sudden we're having very different conversations, very, very different conversations than we've had in a very long time. So that's in the air, right? That is happening now, and you're going to find out a lot about certain people and where their allegiances are and what side of the bread is being buttered for them, right? So a week of tension. We have a fixed T-square, very little remedy with a fixed T-square, intensity, the Saturn, being the tip of the hierarchy or the tip of the administrative point of organization, wants to dominate, right? It wants to put pressure on the energies of change with Uranus. It wants to put pressure on people's voices, people's identities, people's relationships, the things that they hold deeply, deeply, deeply sacred and true to themselves. Whether it's right or wrong, that's what you're getting into with Scorpio. Like Scorpio will circle the wagons. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it big time. I'm seeing it big time on Twitter. This whole Kyrie Irving thing, culturally has set off a real firestorm, which we'll get into. All right. Why don't we, since we're on the subject of the eclipse, why don't we take one more look at the eclipse? Let's get into some of this timeline stuff I'm talking about. So this is the chart for that night, which we've looked at again, looked at before. So really, like 4:59, a.m. on Tuesday, that's where we're really getting into, because it's early in the morning. Like we won't see the eclipse on the night of the eclipse, right? It's happening quite early. And I'll show you what it looks like. So here we have the moon at 15, the sun at 15. These are all really important degrees, right? They need to be in opposition with one another. And then we have the nodes at 13 and 13. And of course, as part of the eclipse, we have Mercury, Sun, and Venus. So right here, it looks like early so by Tuesday night, right? By Tuesday night, if I were to move this forward, Mercury, they're really tight right there, but Mercury will be here by Tuesday night, just wedged between, 1548. That's what, 1556. Is that what that is? Yes. So by the time we get to Tuesday night, right, Mercury will be right here. So when you have Venus, Mercury, and then the sun, what does Venus do? Venus brokers deals. Brokers deals. And that's going to be a very interesting period that night, right? That night. And I would say, watch. I would say watch for races being called very early with that. It's almost like the deal's been done. And when you get into Scorpio, you're into fixed energy, right? Like, with 3% of the vote, and Gretchen Whitmer has retained her gubernatorial position in the state of Michigan. A lot of people think it's going to be a red wave. I think that they're going to be disappointed. I could see easily with this chart, just out and out open fucking cheating, right? I could see this in this chart. I'd like to be wrong. I'd like to think that elections actually matter in the first place. And secondarily, that we would have a fair election. But I don't think that that's going to be the case because of the Mars retrograde and the squaring with Jupiter and Neptune. And then something here is happening. Now, we already talked about a lot of this because it's very similar to the chart that we just looked at with the exception of the moon, because the moon is in Aries, right? So now we have moon Uranus, and this is a blood moon. So the blood moons look like they're closer to the Earth than other moons. This is the description, that the dust in the atmosphere, makes them look red. You tend to see these types of moons more in the fall months in the northern hemisphere, right? So the whole idea of the blood moon carries with it also a almost supernatural connotation. And under the eclipse and the blood moon, I mean, this is just from a language standpoint, preloading everything, it doesn't feel great. I mean, it just does not feel great. And we're into this T-square with Saturn going on. And it's like, the amount of control here that's invested, like in this moment of time, is very intense, right? Like there's a lot, whatever you think of politics, there's a lot in the balance here with this election. And yes, it has to do with either Republicans or Democrats or whatever, right? But it's also people, and it's their spirits and their energy. And whoever is going to quote unquote lose on Tuesday, it is not going to be pretty. I can guarantee you that it will not be pretty. And of course, with the Pluto Mars in conjunct, there are people that they got plans for that. They got plans for that shit. Right. So let's say, for instance, it's not with everything that we've seen and all the polls are red wave, and then it's shut down for 1, 2, 3 days, and we see races being changed. What do you think is going to happen to people? Where do you think they're going to go with their energy? That brings us back to Mars and that square with Neptune and Jupiter. People are going to lose their fucking shit. They're going to lose their shit. Let's say now, if you're on the left, and let's say there is a red wave, and let's be honest, if you watch this show and you're on the left, you're probably not watching the show, but let's say you are, okay? You really have to just like deep down, look inside and observe what's been going on here, apart from any kind of enculturation or party affiliation. If you can be even remotely honest with yourself for a brief period of time, let's say 30 seconds, 30 seconds of true naked honesty, you looking in the mirror and asking yourself, is this the best that we can do? We being the party that you've invested in and elected, is this the best that we can do? And if you have any scintilla of being a human, your answer to that will be 100% no. And you can't add, well, as long as it's not Trump, anything but Trump, because that will cloud your ability to have that moment of clarity, right? So if there was a quote unquote red wave and whatever, a lot of these guys are fucking rhinos anyway. But if that happens and you're on the left and you have that moment of clarity, you could probably say, you know what, we deserve this. We deserve this because this guy is a joke. We have a vice president who doesn't make any sense. I mean, you could clearly step back if you were able to. So you know what? We deserve to get our clock handed to us, whatever, right? Now, you may not be happy about it. You may be pissed about it. It's your right, your choice. But it would not be out of the question if you were a clear, reasonable, person that was not marred by anything but Trump and MAGA and fascists and Kanye and all that shit, right? Because all that stuff is clouding the mind. It's clouding everybody's mind. It's meant to cloud everybody's mind. But either way, nobody's going to win. Nobody's going to win. And the Moon Uranus conjunction is something very sudden and very swift, right? It's almost like, to me, I just keep getting this image of the power going down, and mostly on the West Coast of the United States. I hope I'm wrong. I'd love for them to not freak out and have a reasonable experience, whatever that is, with this thing. But I just keep seeing this, right? Like, this is electric. Uranus is electricity. We have the square to Saturn, and it's the moon, and it's dark. It's this occulted moon. It's going to be an interesting night. I mean, it's one of these things where, honestly, I'm not sure how we're going to deal with whatever happens after the fact. I'm sure we'll find some way to rally enough functional direction so companies can sell a lot of shit for the holidays. But, this is going to be one of those elections on a freaking lunar eclipse where nobody's going to get what they want. And authority is really asserting itself here. Really. And this Pluto in conjunct right here with Mars, that is the sneaky deaky right there. That is the hidden hand around this whole thing. As far as you personally this week, we're in a collective wave right now. We're in a collective wave. Once we get into Scorpio, we're in the transpersonal seasons. Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. These are all transpersonal seasons in the Northern Hemisphere. Well, they are too, also for the Southern Hemisphere, but they're different because here we go into darkness. We literally dive into sort of the hidden and occulted zones of the eighth house. And we're baptized in the dark waters of the eighth house. And that's where we're having, it's really interesting that we have these elections during Scorpio, isn't it? We always have these elections the first Tuesday in the month of November, isn't it? No, it's second Tuesday, right? Because we had last week. It was the second Tuesday of every November. Why Scorpio? Transformation, change, things that are hidden, occulted, power. What would happen if we change the date? what would happen astrologically if we made it the first Tuesday of December? Will we be in the Sagittarius? We might have more honest elections. What would happen if we had it during the last Tuesday in October? Right? We'd probably be in Libra season. Might be more fair and balanced. It's an interesting thought to entertain, why we have the midterms and major elections in the month of November in Scorpio. Transformation, change, death, power, things that are occulted and hidden from us. All right. Let's talk a little Kyrie Irving, shall we? Yeah, so just to wrap that up, like these are collective energies this week. That means, well, your life doesn't matter. And of course your life matters. But when we get into this period and cycle of time, our lives, like for us, really, our personal lives in the Northern Hemisphere really start on March 22nd and pretty much end on September 22nd, right? Well, because that's the growing season. That's when we personally, doesn't matter what your chart is, that's when we are on a personal growth cycle. And then once we get into the outer planets, it's less about us and more about what's out there, or the outer signs. It's more about what's out there. So that's where we are this week. And of course, everybody still has personal lives and hopes and fears and wishes and dreams and loves and hurts and all those things, right? They're all going on. But now we're moving. I mean, we have been moving for about a week now into this collective cycle, which will take us all the way to the end of Pisces. Right. So this is the, we had November, December, January, February, March, the 5 month, almost 5.5 month cycle, nearly 6 month cycle that has more to do with what's out there than kind of what's in here. And your own chart, I mean, you could have a lot of your planets which are below the horizon in the outer signs, and this could be a very personal time for you, right? I mean, that happens. You could be somebody like Scorpio rising, right? You'd have all these planets kind of lined up down here, or Libra rising. They'd all be sort of, so this time of year, you would literally be, resurrected, with the return of the sun in April or late March. Anyway, you can still have that level of development, but it's different because, again, it's connected to the transpersonality of the collective. All right. So I'm going to show you an image here. Let's do this. This was always one of my, like, I was a big, the first Star Trek, Kirk, Spock, Bones. And the thing that I always loved about those Star Trek episodes is when they would time travel and they'd find themselves in kind of weird places, weird times, these weird kind of historical culture mashes. There's at least 6 or 7 episodes like that. Well, there's one where the Enterprise winds up going to where? They wind up going to Germany. And they actually have to become members of the Nazi Party. I mean, look at this shit, right? And to me, this is like one of those crazy Star Trek episodes. Ilsa the she-wolf. I guess they're doing like propaganda shit, like some Goebbels kind of stuff, right? And what's interesting about this episode is that Shatner and Nimoy are both Jews. I just find that deeply ironic, right? It's very ironic. And they're both Aries too, by the way. Their birthdays are very, they're not that different years, but they're staggered by what, 1 or 2 days or something like that. And they had the weirdest relationship on the set. Like they kind of hated each other, but they also knew that they were important to the show. Fascinating, right? And jigs up. Yeah, he's not your average Nazi. No. He's from Moldova. He's one of those strange Moldavians. So this is like a timeline thing, right? This is all related to this weird timeline kind of thing that we're in right now. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to go back and I think this guy's an American that may have gone back in time to reignite the Nazi party or whatever their thing is. Patterns of Force. That's the name of the Star Trek, Patterns of Force. I think the Nazis might have won. I think that's like a page out of Philip K. Dick. So why did I bring that up? Well, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to reconcile a timeline, and a timeline that I think that we are hooked into right now. So I did a show back in September. Let me see if I can find this thing right here. I did a show back in September where I was looking at Jupiter, and it was the Jupiter return. If I'm not mistaken, it's a 70-year cycle. The Jupiter return of where Jupiter was on September 1st, 1939. So if you look over here, we have Jupiter at 7 Aries. I think it's the next day. Right there. And this is where transiting Jupiter was. So it might have been, let's see, September. So I think it was probably like the 2nd or the 1st. I think it was September 1st. So my bad on that. But this was September 1st would have been the exact return of Jupiter. I think was it 72 years, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, this is the exact degree of where Jupiter was when Germany invaded Poland. Right, that's the day they invaded Poland. So if I were to go to the 1st, that's where it would be exact. So when we talk about Jupiter, what are we talking about? We're talking about something that makes something bigger, right? And Aries is war, right? It's war. And again, when we talk about the quote unquote German people at that time and the Third Reich, right? The word Aryan comes up, which is related to Aries. So we're seeing this very interesting confluence historically and energetically. Jupiter and Aries takes us back to this timeline. Look where Uranus is. Right there. So Uranus is separated by 3 degrees. So we have Jupiter, and we have Uranus, 2 of the outer planets. Extremely close, really close. And since this day, so we'll go September 1st, Since this day, September 1st, 2022, the rhetoric around Nazis, Jews, the Second World War, World War III, all this stuff has been really amplified since then. So we're in this really interesting time wave with Jupiter, with this Jupiter return. And I don't think there's any coincidence that Kanye West and Kyrie Irving are having these either conversations or they become flashpoints that have been extremely controversial for a number of people. It's in, and the reason why these conversations, a lot of people say, well, they're shills, they're MK Ultra mind controlled. No, we're in a time wave. We are in a time wave, and particularly Kyrie Irving, a little bit lesser with Kanye, although Kanye is still on the loose, but particularly Kyrie Irving, we are in this time wave. We are in this World War II, just running up to World War II and World War II launching time wave. And even the language of fascism, which I find fascinating. I find the language of fascism fascinating because fascism is like, if you really experience fascism as a person, really experience fascism, you would pee your pants, your knees would buckle, you would be terrified with real fascism. Trust me. Real, total, unabated fascism. Right. You would be scared shitless. Spend a day in China under a COVID lockdown. You'll see what I'm talking about. Because that is when the government has complete and utter control over your entire. This is nothing. I mean, right now, this is nothing. Could it be something? Yes, absolutely. But right now, this is nothing. But even the echo of fascism, which comes from this point in time, is bandied about everywhere. Fascist, 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 fascist. You have no idea. People have no idea what fascism would look like. Real fascism, right? So this is the time wave that we're in right here. And even on that day, Jupiter was retrograde. Look at that. We go back to the first, it's still retrograde and right on the button. Totally on the button. Oh, and look what we have here. The outer ring is our theoretical reality. We have Mars, right? Mars and Gemini. What does Gemini represent? Represents two things, two tracks. So we're on this World War II time wave now, this World War II timeline. And the language of fascism is in the air. The specter of war is in the air. We have ground troops, and we have the ability to launch sorties or ground actions out of Poland, which is the place where the Germans invaded, right? So that's all there. Like, that's all on the ground. That's all part of this like time wave echo. And even with Pallas, look where Pallas is almost on the button. You know, we have Pallas here, 0 Cancer, Pallas here at 28 Gemini. It would be probably maybe 27 if we were to go back to the first, but both Pallases are almost in conjunction as well. And in Gemini, it's understanding the patterns, right, of these two things happening simultaneously. In this case, we're going to call them time streams. Here, you know, with Pallas in Cancer, that's a whole different interpretation, especially for the Germans at that time, right? They're like, okay, we're going to take care of the folk. because that's Cancer. Cancer is like the foe, right? The other thing, of course, we have the sun pretty much in the same position. Of course, that's to be expected. But then we have Mars, Pluto, because at that time Mars was in Capricorn, and then here we have Pluto conjunct that station of Mars. So there's a lot of interesting things that connect these two charts. But the one that I'm really paying attention to most is this Jupiter conjunction and the Uranus conjunction. Because when you have Uranus in Taurus, we saw what happened, right? We saw what happened with Uranus and Taurus in World War II. There was destruction. Europe got destroyed. You had Germany getting destroyed. You had Poland getting destroyed. You had parts of Italy getting destroyed. Buildings in England were being bombed. So we have destruction, right? And that's what happens with Uranus and Taurus. It is deconstructive. It is de-evolutionary. Uranus in Scorpio is exalted, so it's evolutionary. So these are de-evolutionary energies. They're going to literally destroy cities, towns, countrysides, countries, borders. And that's exactly what happens. So we have Uranus, in the same place. The nodes are quite interesting too, because they're just sneaking, right? Like the true node is in Scorpio, just right there, about ready to go into Libra, right? It's at the final degree of Scorpio, and it's at the final degree over here of Taurus. So even the nodes are connected and related, right? South node, true node, south node, true node. Similar signs, but it's like endings and beginnings, right? So when we look at the south node here, which is the past, what is the resonance of the past? It's this, right? That's what that is. We're resonating with this moment in time. We may not be resonating with it like, hey, we really don't want that, but we're connected to this, right? And then theoretically, this should be a reminder to us with the south node here, conjunct Saturn, which will ultimately result in the deconstruction here, right? Where's Saturn? Is that in Aries? Taurus, zero Taurus. So this is what we're looking at just in terms of the timeline stuff. Like the re-expansion of this idea of Aries and war. All right. That's where we are now. And all of these things are like they're coming up, like when we talk about energy in Germany, will Germany have enough fuel to get them through the winter, right? There's a lot of narrative around Germany at this point in time. And you don't see Angela Merkel anywhere. She's like, I don't know what happened to her. She's got ALS or something. A lot of people think it's the adrenochrome. All right. Or lack thereof. Let's take a look at Kyrie Irving. Because to me, this is really interesting. So you guys know Kyrie Irving kicked up a shitstorm by tweeting a graphic to a movie on Amazon Prime. That's a documentary that was put out by the Black Hebrew Israelites. He didn't say anything. He just put it up, right? And some people have said, well, Jeff Bezos should be responsible for it because it's his platform. He's allowing it to be on there. There's some truth to that. Today, when I was on Twitter, I had this tweet, and one of the things that I said was that I don't think there's any difference between Colin Kaepernick and Kyrie Irving. And people might be shocked, but the NBA is a business, right? Oh, that's progressions for Kyrie. The NBA is a business. And I think what they were doing more than anything is that they were protecting their brand. That's what the NBA was doing. Yes. Does the NBA have a huge amount of ownership that happens to be Jewish? Undoubtedly. Is the commissioner of the NBA Jewish? 100%. Right? This is on the piggyback of what Kanye had started rolling a few weeks ago. Can you see now we're in this thing, right? We're in this time wave. And there's this guy, his name is James Brown, and he's been on CBS Sunday football for years. I think he was on there when Phyllis George was on there. And he had a very strong message today that the NFL put out about anti-Semitism and questioning the Holocaust. You see, we're in this time wave. Like, why do they even feel the need to do that? Well, I know why, because people are telling them to do that. We're in this time wave now. We've been taken back to this place where all of this originated, right? World War II, where we have this pariah, quote unquote, Hitler, right? And then, we have Trump, who is the closest version of Hitler. And then we have the red cap, MAGA, which is the equivalent of the brown shirts. And January 6th was a terroristic uprising, right? Which is like the beer hall putches or whatever, the burning of the library. This is all happening for a reason, right? All these things aren't just coming up because they're divisive and powerful political memes to divide and conquer people. They're coming up because there are lies and treachery around World War II that have never, ever been spoken of or talked about. All we've ever heard about World War II was all the feel-good stories, theoretically, John Wayne, Audie Murphy, Gary Cooper, all the feel-good war stories of men and courage and bravery and Iwo Jima and, storming the beaches and France. You know what I mean? I mean, this is what we got. The winners got to tell the tale of victory in World War II. And for all intents and purposes, those stories are fictions. Okay? They're fictions. And there are things about World War II that we just don't know and we don't understand, but it set a marker for the world that we would inhabit from that point forward. You have the Holocaust story. You have the Nuremberg trials. You have the inception of the United Nations, which was going to be the thing that would prevent having a war that would end all wars again, right? All these things come out of World War II. And of course, there's Operation Paperclip and all the quote unquote Nazis, right? That's a big theme. There were a bunch of Nazis that went to Russia too. A lot of people don't know that. The Russians got a number of German brains. Who do you think was hanging out on the other side of the Berlin Wall? Right? And oh, by the way, there's the other story where Hitler and his boys, they left. They got on submarines. They headed out of Spain, South America, Antarctica, right? There's a lot of shit we don't know about World War II. We've been basically fed a feed bag of fiction. Is it okay for me to question World War II now? or is that in the verboten zone? And this is what's coming up now, right? This is what's happening now. And sometimes these conversations that come up are awkward, to say the least. So we're dealing with this timeline, this World War II, just like when Spock and Kirk and Bones went back in time and they had to reset something, right? To do that, ironically, they had to don the gear of the Luftwaffe and the Third Reich. But this is what we're dealing with now, and it's come up. And who's been the fountainhead for it? Kyrie Irving. And what sign is he? He's an Aries. He's an Aries. And what have we been talking about this whole time? Now, I don't know when he was born. He could be Gemini rising. I don't have his birth time. But I do know he's an Aries. I do know he's got Mercury in Aries. He's got a retrograde. He's having to deal with a retrograde moment, isn't he? And Kyrie Irving is very anti-establishment. He's really anti-establishment. He's going to play by his own rules. He's got Mars in Aquarius. He's going to go to the beat of his own drummer. He'll squares Pluto, squares the moon. Even in his so-called apology, he wasn't all that apologetic. And talk about somebody who's dealing with really transpersonal planets here. And I'm going to say something that is maybe a little controversial. I think this guy's misunderstood. I think he's totally misunderstood. He's got Venus right here, just hanging out, almost like the singleton in Pisces. And Venus in Pisces is pretty darn kind and pretty compassionate and pretty empathic. And he's got this Jupiter in Virgo down here at the bottom, retrograding. And it's kind of a hard thing to reconcile, especially if people are always pointing out one's faults. And I'm not saying Kyrie Irving's perfect. He's not a perfect human. He's made a lot of mistakes. But I think he's misunderstood. That's for damn sure. But this is interesting. I'm going to show you why I think this is interesting and why I think he is a portal. Kyrie Irving is a portal to the timeline that we're talking about. And let me show you why I think that is. Okay. So I've never really done anything like this before. This is kind of new ground for me. So remember, right? Remember, we were talking about Jupiter in Aries, Moon in Aries. This is the day, September 1st, 1939. And what do you see right here? Kyrie Irving's Mercury. Right there, 2 degrees off of Jupiter. And what is it in his chart? It's retrograde. So literally, it's retrograding back to this time. Right? He, again, through the movie, little thing, right? The tweet, the Alex Jones tweet. What else? Flat Earth and not getting a vaccine. Those are the 4 things that are the most controversial about Kyrie Irving. But he was literally told that he's going to have to go through classes where he's going to have to be sensitized. These are, this is the training that they have in store for him. The ADL had to turn down $500,000 of his salary, because that was negotiated early on in that deal. That Adam Silver, by the way, Kyrie is suspended indefinitely. But this is what's happening here, right? He has become this voice and this portal to this timeline. And there's some other things here that are interesting too. Look at his Chiron, right? His Chiron is right on Pluto. Right there, right on Pluto. And it's tapping in. It's vulnerability, risk, reward. In Leo, like the sacrifice of being the athlete or the star. It's right there in Pluto. Hard connection. And then his own Jupiter conjunct Venus and the sun on that very day, right? Sun at 7, Virgo, whereas his Jupiter 6. And what's his Jupiter doing? It's retrograding and going back. To me, he isn't just an individual. I mean, he is, but he is connected to this time, right? And you're hearing all of these things now. They're bringing up all of this material around the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. And he's become a cyclone of controversy. And really what he is he is a portal. His chart is a portal to this time and to this timeline. This is exactly what I'm seeing here. So when we talk about these parallel timelines, right? And let's face it, all these wars have been lies. They've all been lies. They've all had, some degree of honor or valor attached to them, with the exception of maybe the Vietnam War. And everybody knew the Vietnam War was a lie. But they've all been lies. And we've built a post-World War II fiction, a post-World War II world based on lies. Now, what those lies are to be determined. That's a TBD, right? To be determined. One of the things you can test with reality is how well something worked in the past and how well it might work in the present or the future. So when we were going through all the hardcore, hardline vaccine mandates, and people were being forced to either take the jab and not work or be isolated, or wherever those things were, whatever they were. Reiner Fulmick, who headed up this group for the next Nuremberg 2.0, right? It was going to be a big deal, and everybody's Nuremberg rights were being violated. Well, what happened with that? Where did that go? Was there ever going to be a Nuremberg 2.0? Well, the first Nuremberg was used to talk about the atrocities of the war, right? And to create a global form of conduct that would never allow something like that to happen again, right? Well, your Nuremberg rights are being violated on a daily basis. You are supposed to be informed of having a medical procedure performed on you. That was part of the Nuremberg trial, right? I guarantee you, if you live somewhere in the United States, you're drinking fluoridated water. If you're not, you're drinking off of a well, or for whatever reason, your city has the foresight to not allow you to drink that poison. But it's happening without your consent. It happens every day. Every time you swill some fluoridated water, it's without your consent. So the Nuremberg Code is being broken again and again and again and again and again. So how valid is it? Well, it was valid at a certain point in time, valid enough to set things up so that moving forward, we wouldn't have to deal with these atrocities. How's it worked? How did it work with COVID? These are just a few things that I'm talking about here, right? We had a whole post-World War II world built on that war and built on a body of evidence, assumptions, truths, untruths. It's all been built around that. Everything that we experience in our world is part of the post-World War II, for lack of a better term, reconstruction. And what is Kyrie Irving doing? He's bringing us back literally to that time. Now, we're already there because of the Jupiter return. It's already in the air, right? Now, all of a sudden, it's like they want his ass. Now, all of a sudden, you're getting James Brown talking about, the place for speech. And there's no place for hate speech. Certainly hate speech about like, why did he have to bring that up? Why did he have to bring that up? Somebody told him to. That's number one. Number two, we're in this time wave. We're in this time wave. We're in this timeline. And it started with the Jupiter return. And Kyrie Irving, in his own way, became the voice right there for that. It's exactly what happened. So this is a bigger deal than I think we understand. Because there are two things that have plagued our current society, probably more than any other thing, at least as they've been pointed out by the people that like to point these things out, is number one is slavery, right? Slavery that's another part of this timeline. It's another part of the timeline. Whatever you think of the thing that he tweeted, right? It's a part of this timeline that we're talking about. And it's not, and even Kanye West, he said, when you go to the Black History Museum in Washington, D.C., what do you see? The first thing you see is the slavery story, right? It's not about, somebody from Africa who was, a leader or, royal or a king or anything like that. It's like, that's your story. That's where it starts, right? That's a big part of where we are right now. Big part of it. That timeline. The other timeline is this one. So we're talking about slavery and we're talking about World War II. And we're not going to be able ultimately to move beyond where we are until these two things are reconciled. And they will be reconciled. This is just the nature of things, right? This is the nature. We have the South Node in Scorpio, and it's coming up. The dark stuff, the occulted stuff, the forbidden stuff. These are the things that are going to be on the table, right? They are going to be on the table, and they're going to bring up really uncomfortable conversations. Really, really uncomfortable conversations. But this is where we are. Maybe next week I'll look at the other quote unquote 1870 timeline or something like that. But this World War II one is big. It's really, really big. And it's not, I don't think it's going to go away. I really don't think it's going to, and what I'm finding on Twitter is that there are more and more people who are quote unquote, siding with Kyrie Irving. Hashtag I stand with Kyrie. I've seen it. I did not put that in my Twitter feed, by the way. Not because I don't believe that the guy has a right to say what he has to say. He does. If you're the Brooklyn Nets And here's again, if you're the Brooklyn Nets and you don't like that tweet that he put out, like, hey, dude, it's like you're representing our business here. We don't really like that. We don't like that group of people. They yell at people on the streets of New York. We don't like that. You represent us, right? Do they have the right to do that? Do they have the right to tell him, hey, look, we don't really stand by that? It's an interesting question. You go to Starbucks and somebody's lecturing you about why abortion should be legal while they're making your latte. Like, do you want to keep them as an employee? Eventually they're going to piss somebody off and you're going to fire them, right? So there's a financial decision involved here, but it's a very thin line in a lot of ways between being able to express one's political beliefs and or question certain narratives in the world, and especially if you're a public figure. If I were the Nets, how would I have handled it? Hey, we don't stand by that tweet. We stand by Kyrie's right to be able to express himself. And we would fight for that for anybody, whether they're expressing trans rights or whatever, right? And that's it. And then you sit down with Kyrie Irving and you say, look, we're paying you a lot of money. Okay. We got a brand here and we got a business. And, can you just do this in the fucking off season or something? Right. Like, have that conversation. But you got to stand by the guy and say, yeah, he as an American has a right to express himself. And we may not agree with that. And we would hope that, if he looked into this, he might find a different conclusion. But he's an American and we stand by him. They're not going to do that, though, because they're owned by a guy who owned fucking Alibaba. He owns Alibaba, right? The Amazon of China. So, but this is where we are now. And it's all coming up. It's all coming up. That which has been, verboten, because that's what Scorpio is, right? It's like Scorpio's the area you just don't go to. Scorpio is the area that is it's the underworld, right? You just leave it alone. Now it's coming up. And usually what happens when there's a concerted effort to try to stem the tide of things that are coming up, doesn't really work very well. Especially now when we have all this Aquarian energy, when we have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, right? On December 21st in 2020. When you go out to do something and set out to do something, what happens? Usually the inverse happens. So when all these guys come down hard on Kanye, like this Pasternak character, or Adam Silver, it's going to have a reverse effect. People need to understand that it's going to have a reverse effect. So the best thing you could do is to address the taboo. With the South Node in Scorpio, it's the past, and you can't not address the past, right? Now that it's there, you have to literally exercise the taboo. And any attempt to quell that or put it back in the box is going to backfire. It's totally going to backfire. So Kyrie Irving has become a portal to that timeline. All you got to do is look at his Mercury right on that Jupiter. Remember the Jupiter return of that date and time. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. All right. The other thing too is this whole fascist thing. Oh my God, this fascist shit. And you go back and you look at the birth of Antifa. Well, fuck it. It's happening right around the same time. It's happening right around the same time. The anti-fascist, right? It's happening in Germany in the 30s. Just as Hitler is coming to power. It's like, okay, well, you have the Stalinists and you have the Marxists. The Stalinists, and they didn't all see eye to eye. But eventually they rallied around the fact that they didn't like the Social Democrats. So now with fascism, right? Again, it's the same time period. It's the echo of the same time. This is what we're dealing with now, right? It's all because it's never been resolved. It's never been resolved. Mars retrograde, gonna get real interesting. All right. I wanted to talk a little bit about Nostradamus tonight. Nostradamus is an interesting character. He's a very interesting character. What is this? So you guys, you're all familiar with the Nostradamus story. I was looking into this tonight. So supposedly that this is his chart. This is all Julian calendar stuff. So this is his chart in the center. Moon in Scorpio, Sun, Mercury, Capricorn, ninth house, right? Venus, Aquarius, Uranus, Taurus, true node at 28, Pisces, a lot of Cancer, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, right? So it's a classic kind of funnel chart. And Nostradamus was a healer. He helped a lot of people during the plague. He trained in medicine. He was Jewish, changed his name, and was picked out when he was young to study with his grandfather. And he studied things like the Kabbalah and astrology and astronomy, some of the medical arts. So his grandfather was passing on occult and esoteric knowledge to Nostradamus. And so for a while he was a doctor. And back in those days, you had to learn astrology also to be a doctor, because the planets represented parts of your body, and there were humors and all these other things that went along with them, right? So he was actually a pretty good doctor. He helped a lot of people during the plague. And one of the things is that he would go into a town and he would tell the people to gather roses, like 1,000 roses. He also made sure that before he came to the town that all the dead bodies had been disposed of. And he was very into cleaning himself and washing himself before and after any of these procedures. But what he did is he actually made his own version of vitamin C using rose petals, rose hips, right? So he's actually able to give these people who were dealing with the plague an antidote, which was vitamin C. They needed more vitamin C, so he saved a lot of people. But then he starts at another point to get these images and visions, which are the quatrains. And it's quite interesting, right? Because I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I'm looking at the chart. By the way, there's the 29-degree south node where my sun is. It's like, well, is this guy psychic? It's like, is he deeply, deeply intuitive? I'm just kind of looking around like, okay, is this guy really intuitive? Where would Nostradamus be able to pull, such striking imagery from the future into his time? So I said, okay, what about that true node in Pisces? What about that? That's kind of interesting, right? Where is that true node? 28 Pisces. Yeah. That's interesting, right? Go to the 12th house, tap into, this kind of cosmic mirror at the end of the zodiac, in the study, or in the quiet spaces, of his contemplative soul. And yet Uranus natally in the 12th house too, which is interesting because it connects him with a lot of his Cancerian planets. But I thought to myself, Capricorn rules time. He's really Capricornian in a lot of ways. And like, I guess he could do this. I guess he could kind of pull it off. He's got the moon in Scorpio in the 8th house. Yeah, I could kind of see this, right? I just in the 7th house. And then Pluto in the 8th house. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is where it's coming from. I'm just looking for clues. So my best guess is that it's probably going to be that true node in Pisces in the 8th house with Juno there, tapping into something very transpersonal, right? And then this is the period of time where he started to kind of get the visions. So now we have a Jupiter transit through his 12th house. Okay. That's interesting. And then he had Saturn at that time, transiting Mercury. So Saturn opposition. He's giving up his medical practice to do this other thing. Okay, well, this makes sense. Now I'm starting to see the picture coming together here. Jupiter is expanding the 12th house. He's getting these deep insights, right? And then he's going through this Saturn opposition. Time to do something different. So that, okay, well, this could make some sense. But I have to say, when I initially saw Nostradamus' chart, it didn't really strike me as the chart of like a mystic or a seer. I'm just saying. Like, and I remember looking at this chart a long time ago. I'm like, it's like you look at somebody's chart, you expect something different. When you look at that chart. And I never really could wrap my head around the fact that it didn't really like scream prophet in some ways. So then I went and I dove a little bit deeper into Nostradamus, and there are some very interesting things I found. And some of them, if you are a Nostradamus romanticist, I'm probably going to pop your cherry a little bit here. And then it gets even weirder. Okay, so Wikipedia talks about his life. He's from Provence. By the way, he died of gout, so he lived probably a pretty good life. The healing work is really good, right? He helps a lot of people during the plague, and occultism starts to get into this a little bit. Now, what happens is kind of fascinating here. This is the part that got my attention. Because remember, when I saw his chart, it's like it didn't strike me as the chart of like a seer prophet, right? All right, so check this out. Nostradamus claimed to base his published predictions on judicial astrology, the astrological judgment or assessment of the quality and thus potential of events such as births, weddings, coronations, etc., but was heavily criticized by professional astrologers of the day, such as Lawrence Vidal, for incompetence and for assuming that comparative horoscopy, the comparison of future planetary configurations with those accompanying known past events, could actually predict what would happen in the future. Well, I kind of am in the Nostradamus camp on this a little bit. Research suggests that much of his prophetic work paraphrases collections of ancient end-of-the-world prophecies, mainly Bible-based, supplemented with references to historical events and anthologies of omen reports, and then projects those into the future, in part with the aid of comparative horoscopy, hence the many predictions involving ancient figures such as Sulia, Gaius, Marius, Nero, and others, as well as his descriptions of battles in the clouds and fogs falling from the sky. Astrology itself is mentioned only twice in Nostradamus's preface and 41 times in the centuries themselves, but more frequently is his dedicatory letter to King Henry II. In the last quatrain of his 6th century, he specifically attacks astrologers. His historical sources include easily identifiable passages from Livy, Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, Plutarch, and other classical historians, as well as from medieval chroniclers such as Geoffrey of Villehardin and Jean Froissart. Many of his astrological references are taken almost word from word from Richard Roussat's Lyre de l'Astat et Mutations de Temps of 1549 and 50. One of his major prophetic sources was evidently the Mirabilis Liber of 1522, which contained a range of prophecies by Pseudo Methodius, the Tiburtine Sibyl, Joachim of Fior, Savonarola, who is a monk, and others. His preface contains 24 biblical quotations, all but 2 in the order used by Savonarola. So Savonarola might have been a better prophet than Nostradamus. This book had enjoyed considerable success in the 1520s when it went through half a dozen editions, but did not sustain its influence, perhaps owing to its mostly Latin text mixed with ancient Greek in modern French and Provençal, Gothic script, and many difficult abbreviations. Nostradamus was one of the first to reparaphrase these prophecies in French, which may explain why they're credited to him. Modern views of plagiarism did not apply in the 16th century. Authors frequently copied and paraphrased passages without acknowledgement, especially from the classics. The latest research suggests that he may have used bibliomancy for his randomly selecting a book of history or prophecy and taking his cue from whatever page it happened to fall open at. People do that all the time. Further material was gleaned from the De Honesta Disciplina of 1504 by Petrus Quintius, which included extracts of Michael Celio's De Demonibus and the Mysterious Egyptorium concerning the mysteries of Egypt, a book of Chaldean and Assyrian magic by Iamblichus, a 4th century Neoplatonist. Latin versions of both had recently been published in Lyon, and extracts are from both are paraphrased in the second case almost literally in his first 2 verses, the first of which is appended to this article. While it is true that Nostradamus claimed in 1555 to have burned all the occult works in his library, no one can say exactly what books were destroyed in the fire. Only in the 17th century did people start to notice his reliance on earlier, mainly classical sources. This is really fascinating, right? Because I kept looking at Nostradamus's chart. I'm like, this does not strike me as the chart of a prophet, but it strikes me as the chart of a profiteer. Sun, Mercury, what else? Midheaven, Capricorn. Given his reliance on literary sources, it is unlikely that Nostradamus used any particular methods for entering a trance state other than contemplation, meditation, and incubation. His sole description of this process is contained in letter 41 of his collected Latin correspondence. The popular legend that he attempted the ancient methods of flame gazing, water gazing, or both simultaneously is based on a naive reading of his first two verses, which merely liken his efforts to those of the Delphic and Branchitic oracles. The first of these is reproduced at the bottom of this article, and the second can be seen by visiting the relevant facsimile site. See external links and his dedication to King Henry II. Nostradamus describes emptying my soul, mind, and heart of all care, worry, and unease through mental calm and tranquility. But his frequent references to the bronze tripod of the Delphic Rite are usually preceded by words as though, compare once again, external references to original text. So what's very interesting, he gets into, of course, Hitler and Bonaparte, World Trade Center. What's interesting about Nostradamus is his relationship with this guy named Jules Scaliger. Jules Scaliger. They were very good friends. And they would often have these debates about philosophy and medicine and all kinds of other interesting sports of the mind. In 1531, Nostradamus was invited by Jules César Scaliger, a leading Renaissance scholar, to come to Aachen. There he married a woman of uncertain name, possibly Henriette d'Enclos, with whom he had two children. Scaliger's son would go on to essentially write a great account of European, Oriental, and Arabic history. And in fact, Anatoly Fomenko, who was a former KGB agent, who looked at propaganda, and he said, well, if the West is propagandizing things on a daily basis, are they propagandizing history itself? And he began to look into history and used to look at things like comets that would be historical markers. And Fomenko's books on time are voluminous and are very difficult to penetrate. But essentially, what he came up with was that this guy Scaliger and some of his students, his charges, who were probably more like his lovers, that they wound up falsifying a great deal of history. Like a lot of the stories that we have come to know came through Jules Scaliger's son, right? And so then when you look at Nostradamus and his relation with this guy, and look, I think Nostradamus is really interesting. I've always been fascinated by the quatrains. But the more I read about him and how he was able to pull from these works of the day and kind of rebrand them and repackage them and remarket them, begins to make a lot more sense. Now, he may have hit on a few of these things, right? But that is not to me, I never saw that as the chart of somebody who was some kind of great prophet, right? Or great seer. You look at Edgar Casey's chart, it's all over his chart. He's a Pisces, right? He can sort of merge with worlds. Nostradamus is a businessman. Nostradamus is a Capricorn. And given that he had, and in fact, they added one day to the calendar, like the it's not the Julian calendar, it's called the Julian Day, based on Jules Caesar Scaliger. Anyway, just a very interesting sort of like side journey into the chart of Nostradamus. Which I don't think he's like a super. It doesn't scream prophet or seer. Like when you see a chart, when I see a chart, I'm like, wow, that's a really interesting chart, man. I mean, that person's got some one foot in one world, one foot in another world. Charts are revelatory that way. They're revelatory. They tell a story, right? What is Nostradamus' story? He's a really good marketer. He wanted to become well-known and famous, and he hung out with well-known and famous people. That's what Capricorns do. Was he able to get some inspiration? Maybe. 28 degrees, true node, Pisces, 12th house. Yeah, sure. Why not? But again, what are we talking about here? We're talking about, somebody who wrote a historical narrative about somebody that may not even really be true, based on the myth, the legend, all the things that, and look, I'm sure John Hogue can sort all this stuff out real easily. Anyway, so what are we going to do now? We're going to say goodnight. That's what we're going to do. So thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. And I really want to follow up more on this timeline idea that we're in now, this World War II timeline idea, because I think it's in the air, right? It is definitely in the air. And Kyrie Irving gave it voice, even though he didn't really come out. I mean, Kanye West is talking more about these things, but it's all kind of bundled together now. And it all came about when we had that Jupiter return at 7 Aries. It would have been on the 1st of September this year, the exact degree. All right, the rest of the week, do your best, take care of yourself. That I urge. It's been hard to sleep a lot lately. Last night I was knocked out. I was totally wiped out. But do your best to take care of yourself. And this is I'd like to say, well, it'll be a fine week. I don't really think it will be. I think it's going to be a crazy week, right? And where you enter into it is going to be important. I would say try not to get sucked into drama, right? Don't let your loosh go, spilling all over the place. At the same time, it's probably going to be hard not to try to exercise some righteous indignation, because the tension's been building for so high right now, such a long period of time. And it's going to be interesting to see how we resolve this timeline stuff, because it's just getting started. All right. Thank you for being here. If you want to book a reading with me, go to robertphoenix.com. We can do that. Of course, I like speaking on other people's shows. You can always reach out to me for that. Mods, thank you very much for holding down the fort tonight. And I think that's about it. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to discern what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Thanks for being here. Join me on Tuesday on 15 Minutes of Flame. And then if you're a member, we'll be doing a get together with a live election stream and chart and all kinds of stuff. So you can always subscribe to be a member, 5, 10, 20.